With the launch of the final shape, I know the focus has been all about the new weapons. However, we've also gotten new exotic catalysts, one of which we recently reviewed, which is the Tessellation Catalyst, which, by the way, if you want to check out that review, we'll link that one down below. Today, though, we're going to be reviewing a weapon that is already so good, just at base. And Bungie has gone out and given us an exotic catalyst, which I couldn't believe. And that is the exotic sidearm Final Warning. Now listen, amongst primary DPS, Final Warning is one of the best, and in some cases, it is the best. The sidearm buffs it received alongside with the final shape sandbox, we expected this weapon to still be fantastic, but I don't think any of us expected an exotic catalyst. But here we are, looking at already an S tier weapon with now an S tier catalyst. First up, we need to talk about how to get this exotic because I know there are some new players. To get Final Warning, you must complete the final strand quest that you get after beating the Lightfall campaign and then unlocking all the strand fragments. Now, once you have the quest, it's pretty straightforward, and we'll have a walkthrough link down below if you want to check that out. Now, how do you get the exotic catalyst? Well, it's purely RNG. It drops from Strikes, Crucible, and Gambit. Literally just playing in our ritual playlist, you have a chance of getting it. Now, for me, guys, it didn't take that many games. I've heard people getting it within like 1 or 2 games, whether it's Crucible, Comp, or even just a few strikes. And to my knowledge, it doesn't matter which version of the ritual playlist you do. As in, I don't believe higher difficulty Nightfalls plays a role in increasing the RNG of this drop. It purely just comes down to RNG. Now, before we jump into what the exotic catalyst does, let's take a quick look at Final Warning itself, alongside the buffs that it received in the final shape. Now, Final Warning's main perk is called All at Once, and it reads, holding down the trigger marks targets within range and loads multiple bullets, which fire in a burst with increased stability on trigger release. Hitting a marked target with a fully charged burst will unravel them. Now, its second perk is called Pick Your Poison, where hip-firing projectiles will track marked targets, dealing increased body shot damage on impact. However, when aiming down sights, the projectiles will have greatly increased velocity and they'll deal extra critical hit damage to those marked targets. Now, if you used Final Warning before, you know both of these perks interface fluidly. Now, what I love is that Final Warning feels exotic while you're charging up those shots, having the tracking take over, causing that mass unravel. But where things get a little complicated is when you get to branching options of either aiming down sights for that increased precision damage or hip firing for that increase in body damage. Now, looking at those numbers here at Carl, we deal 3,767 damage per body and 5,281 damage per crit. Now, we take advantage of the Pick Your Poison perk. When hip firing, our body shot damage increases by 20% over base. This goes up to 4,520 damage per body. So pretty good. But then if we look at the other side of the perk, where we aim down sights and deal damage to marked targets, this is a 100% increase in damage, jumping up to 10,562 damage per crit. Guys, by simply aiming, we can double our damage. And let me just say, 10,000 damage is no small number. A fully charged burst of 10 is 105,620 damage. This is more than what a single rocket does to Carl. And on top of that, you can fire it back to back. Final Warning here literally shoots mini nukes. Now, I know we went over these 2 perks pretty quick, but the perk name is actually very fitting here. Pick Your Poison. You can either hip fire and get 20% more damage with auto tracking, or you can aim down sights and go for double damage, but it requires you to aim for the head. Regardless, Final Warning has the ability to increase its lethality with ease. And what's crazy is that Final Warning was actually buffed with the launch of the final shape. It was affected by 2 changes. One was a decrease in exotic primary bonus damage against red bars by 10%, and the other change was actually for all sidearms. This was a 20% increase in damage against red bars. So what this really netted out to, after accounting for both of those changes, Final Warning is essentially dealing 10% more damage against minors at base. And if we check out those numbers, a marked body hits for 9,827 damage, and a marked crit deals 22,960 damage. Now that is base Final Warning, and it's very obvious from what you see here that it is already extremely strong. This takes us to the exotic catalyst. Now the catalyst adds a perk called String Theory. Do I got any physicists in the house? But hits against marked targets, deals increased damage, and have a chance to refund ammo to the magazine. Now guys, that is a stacked exotic catalyst. Bungie's literally amping an already S tier weapon, which I am all for. But the last thing I expected for an exotic catalyst on a weapon that already hits as hard as Final Warning is for it to deal more damage. Now when the catalyst is applied, our base precision and body shot damage stays the same, as we would expect. But when we activate activate Pick Your Poison. Our hipfire and body shot damage, which was 4,520 damage, jumps up to 4,746. And our crit damage goes from 10,562 damage to 11,090 damage per crit. Now this is a flat 5% increase given to both sources of damage. Now I know 5% may not be super flashy, but keep in mind guys, Final Warning is already doing a tremendous amount of damage. Now what's even more interesting with this catalyst is that this number differs depending on the tier of enemy that you're damaging. For instance, against Carl, it was a 5% damage buff. But looking at our damage against red bars, our hipfire shot goes from 9,827 to 10,809. And our ADS crit goes from 22,960 to 25,256. Fellas, this is a 10% increase for both of those. And now, I understand why this distinction was made by Bungie. But it is honestly still surprising to see them increase the damage against red bars as much. Compounded from the 10% buff in the patch notes and this catalyst, Final Warning is simply doing 20% better than it was doing last season. And hell fellas, we had back-to-back builds with this thing last season at base. And what's crazy is that this is not even the full effect. We still have the portion of the catalyst that refunds ammo to the magazine. So looking at that, after spamming at Carl for a while, the refund seems to be 2 to 4 shots per burst of 10. Now it is definitely random, but I would expect after 2 full bursts, you should have around 5 shots left. Now does this effect drastically change how we use this weapon? Not really. And I wouldn't put the ammo regeneration on the same level as something like rewind rounds, but don't get it mistaken. This is absolutely an impactful effect. There have been times that I used Final Warning, and I found myself firing off a few bullets between charges, leading to my second one being half-baked. This ammo refunding pretty much exists as a cushion to send out some single shots, and more often than not, have a full burst ready to go afterwards, or just simply to have some extra shots to clean up the enemy. Now I know we've laid out some very large numbers, but I do want to give some context. These tests we're about to do are going to be simulated against red bars. Let's take a quick look at the 1 mag DPS of Final Warning. With the ADS damage increase and 6 bullets being returned, we get 656,656 total damage over 7.55 seconds. And this comes out to a DPS value of 86,974. Now, if we took Devil's Ruin, which deals 151,215 damage over its full mag, this has a DPS value of 81,298 damage. Now, if we took all this and compare it to a loaded out legendary sidearm like Michael, we get a 1 mag damage amount of 87,680 and a DPS value of 34,384. I think context is important, and these are some pretty incredible DPS values. Granted, it's against red bars, but these are after all primary weapons. And despite Devil's Ruin being essentially a pocket fusion rifle, Final Warning still outperforms it. As a matter of fact, even last year when we did DPS testing of different primary weapons, Final Warning was absolutely cracked. And what's so crazy is that it's even better now. Now, before we completely wrap everything up in this review, I want to quickly touch on both our artifact and on PvP. Now, where the artifact is considered, there's only one mod that benefits us here, and that is Threaded Blast. This reads that destroying a tangle with a strand weapon creates a larger and more damaging explosion. Now, although this doesn't necessarily interface with Final Warning directly, the free unravel that we get off of every fully charged burst will allow tangles to spawn on cooldown. And since Final Warning is obviously strand, we're able to take advantage of those amped up tangle explosions. Let me just say, guys, they are very powerful, even in PvP. Like, I've literally gotten double kills and even triple downs with other strand weapons utilizing this artifact mod. Now, on the PvP side of things, we're kind of in a similar boat where nothing's really that crazy, but still worth mentioning. The catalyst does work inside of PvP, taking our charge hipfire damage from 31 to 34 and our ADS crit damage from 81 to 89. Now, this is a 10% increase. Doesn't necessarily change your time to kill, but it does offer extra forgiveness, and of course, extra forgiveness at range. Now, for me personally, guys, I don't really use sidearms in PvP. I know it's a thing that a lot of controller players use. I'll go up against a couple people rocking some God Roll heliocentrics, and yeah, they shred. But I normally find myself relying on other primary weapons as I like to get into more duels. Final Warning is in that situation where you're almost in shotgun territory, and if you wait too long to try to get the lock, someone can close the gap and kill you. Now, with that being said, when you aim down sights and you get that lock and you hit those back-to-back 3 crits, it's insane. Dude, 89 damage per crit. Yes, you do have to pre-charge, but from the moment you get that lock and you land those crits, you're talking a 0.27 time to kill value. Listen, I'm not saying that you should go out there and use Final Warning inside of PvP and that it's suddenly going to make you the best player overnight, but there are a few select players out there that are utilizing Final Warning, and with this catalyst, this will make them all the deadlier. So for me, guys, not necessarily my playstyle, but for you, it may be perfect. And dude, I've seen some wild gamers with Final Warning. People that back up, they go for the hip fire, and they literally just go for the tracking shots. And even if you can't get the lock, it's not like the base time to kill here is bad. We're still talking a 0.67 time to kill value. Overall, guys, Final Warning has always been a fantastic weapon. It is one of the few exotics that I actually would say, Bungie, you didn't even need to make a catalyst. But hey, we will absolutely take it. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.